Hi, everyone. This is Dan McGran with Rev-Trac. It's the minute past the top of the hour here, so we're going to get started with today's webinar. It's our first in our series of Customer Spotlight webinars, and today is with our new customer, Swagelok. So I'm happy to be here with Mark Carbon from our customer, Swagelok. They're based in Salone, Ohio, Northeast Ohio. And before we get into very brief introductions of myself and Mark, just a few logistical items I want to cover. Right, so this is being recorded, the webinar is, and everyone will get a link a few hours later this afternoon in the US time frame for with that link. The slides are accessible during the webinar. You can access them from the sort of go to webinar menu over there if you want to download them, or if you don't do it, or if you're just catching this recording afterward, you can always reach out to us for a copy of the slides if you want. Everyone is muted, but you have two ways. You can submit questions via the chat or the questions button in the go to webinar sort of interface there. And we will, at the end, Mark and I will go through those questions, however they would be submitted, and do our best to answer them. So that's a little bit about the logistics. And again, my name is Dan McGran. I'm the Rev-Trac sales director. I'm based in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, close to the SAP headquarters, if you've ever been out in that area. And Mark Carbon is the Software Quality Assurance Director at Swagelok and based at their location in Northeast Ohio there. I've had the privilege to work with Mark and others at Swagelok as Rev-Trac was installed and configured at Swagelok to automate, simplify, and improve their SAP change management processes. It's been a great time meeting and working with that team. Swagelok is a relatively new Rev-Trac customer. Just over 1 year ago is when we started working with them, which makes us all even more excited that they're able to share their story today, because it shows that Rev-Trac can deliver quick value and results to our customers. So we're very happy that Mark's able to share a lot of this information today. We don't have an agenda slide, as is normal in a lot of webinars, but what we're going to look at today is Mark is going to provide a brief introduction to Swagelok, their history a little bit, their SAP environment, how long they've been with SAP, that type of information. And then he'll review their previous SAP change management processes to give you an idea of what they were doing up until the point they switched over to Rev-Trac, maybe some challenges they were having with those. And then Mark has the meat of the presentation in today's webinar is some really great insight that Mark's going to give into some key aspects of their processes, both before and after Rev-Trac. And he's got some really nice slides to present that information. And I think that will relate very well to many of the people on today's call. And then Mark will wrap his part up with some observations of how Rev-Trac helped, maybe some of the benefits they achieved, those types of things to share with today's audience. And then I will come back on, talk a little bit more about some other customers that we've had the privilege of working with, a little bit about some Rev-Trac key features for those that aren't familiar with it, and maybe some enhancements we've made to those features recently, because we know there are a lot of existing customers on today's call, so that might be some useful information for you. And then pretty much wrap up with some new SAP technologies that Rev-Trac is keeping aware of and developing from an R&D perspective. So we'll update everybody on that. And then we'll move to the Q&A session and wrap it up probably, I'm thinking maybe 30 to 40 minutes from now. So thanks very much for joining, everyone. And with that, I'm going to move on to the first slide and pass things over to Mark Carbon.
Thanks, Dan. And greetings, everyone. As Dan said, my name's Mark Carbon. I am with the quality assurance team here at Swagelok Company, and Swagelok's so roughly a $2 billion company, looking to head to $3 billion. And one of the things we needed to do to promote some growth was to get some automation in place. So you're going to hear a little bit about that today, at least in this particular area. We are headquartered in Salone, Ohio, which is roughly 25 miles southeast of Cleveland. And As Dan mentioned, we've been running SAP for around 12 years. So quite a few modules up, and you'll hear some of that as we go through where we put Rev-Trac in. So, all right, Dan, go. All right. So if you're not yet a customer of Rev-Trac, I'm guessing the story you're going to hear is probably, at least pieces of it, are going to be very familiar. And the customers that are listening as well, you probably went through some similar pains that we're going through, but our particular problem, or let's say opportunity, as we like to call it, our previous process we used to control and manage transport was an evolution into a combination of SharePoint lists and customized SAP tools, spreadsheets at times, a conglomeration of inefficient things bolted together to make this work for us. Some of the pain points that we have listed here. We had what we call a tracker, which is our SharePoint list essentially, and a basic SharePoint list with some very rudimentary workflow involved. So we needed multiple tracker entries for any chains that had more than one transport, and those were getting to become more and more frequent for us. So we had gotten to the point where a lot of the tools that we were using just were not efficient any longer. You know, the migration part of it, migrating from dev to queue to prod, was all manual. The incorporation of manual tasks was you'd go through a stopping point in the process, send an email to somebody to go do their step. They would send you an email back. Okay, I'm done. Then we can continue on. So again, not a very efficient process there. Sequencing. So as we get changes that have multiple transports, or a project going in that has 50 transports or 100 transports, the sequencing of those things became difficult to do manually and difficult to get right. So that was not a good place for us to be. Orphan transports, we definitely had our share of those in the various environments. We really wanted something to help us identify and eliminate those, because those got to be a problem during upgrades and so forth. The manual utilities, yes, we had several different ones of these that helped us to identify sequencing issues, dependency issues, that kind of thing, stuff that the Rev-Trac product will do for you automatically. Third-party integrations, we didn't have any, no built-in integrations to any of the nicer stuff we have in place, like ServiceNow, HP Quality Center, and so forth, and very limited reporting with our old process. It was very painful to get information for, let's say, auditors, which is becoming more and more of a need to be able to provide auditors with timely and accurate information, and that got to be difficult to do. And QA refreshes, yeah, that was a big process before to identify which transports to reapply, and Rev-Trac will definitely help you with that. So all of these things were significant pain points for us that we were looking to address. Okay, Dan, let's build it out here. And this again is just a kind of a graphical view of what our old process looked like. In this particular case, I'm showing a change that has 3 transports. The blue lines there are showing you that we had a separate tracker entry, a SharePoint list entry for each transport, and had to keep track of that separately as it went from dev into queue and then ultimately on into production. But the key point really here is that it's not very efficient to have multiple entries for one particular change, one related change. So this was our reality, and we were dealing with it, but not a very efficient way of doing things, and we knew that. And yeah, so our old process, as these things would migrate from dev to queue and then on into prod, there was a stopping point right when everything got to QA for a CAB review, which is our change advisory board, which is for us, for normal changes, it's a weekly meeting that happens to review what's queued up to go into prod, gives multiple groups the opportunity to review those and raise their hand if they see a problem or issue with it at that point. But it's the stopping point and the approval to say, okay, these are good to go into prod. And once that approval is given, then a list would be generated of, all right, here's all the transports that are queued up for this particular week. Hand those off to our basis folks, and then they would take it and implement into prod based on our schedule. All right, so these red callouts here, this is a very now ugly looking slide, and it was intended to be ugly looking because our original process had a lot of pain points in it, and these red callouts are really kind of highlighting the pain points. But starting along the top, the BA, SA, Dev, that for us means the business analyst or system analyst or a developer was responsible for identifying the grouping or sequencing of the transports. They would have to go in and update these tracker entries to indicate, all right, this is transport 1, next is transport 2, so forth. Just to the right of that, you'll see BASA run TR check. So TR check was a utility that was manually run in our environment to identify sequencing issues or dependency issues, things of that nature. But again, it was a utility, and it had to be manually run. It was not built into the process, no automation at all. And I mentioned that near the bottom. I see manual TR check runs. If a TR check run identified a problem, if the person that was running the utility wasn't the person that was going to be fixing it, you had to start to send emails out to the right people to get them to look at it, correct it, go back, run it again, make sure everything looked okay. So again, just kind of highlighting the inefficiencies in the process here. In the blue lines, the BAs and SAs were responsible for running the utility to identify problems. As we get over to the CAB review part, the IT QA team, so my team was really responsible for making sure of the sequencing and dependency that was clear by the time we get to the CAB review. And if it wasn't, again, we start with the emails back and correct it and rerun it, and just again, not a very efficient process for us. Let's see. Yeah, once we get through the CAB review, again, I mentioned we export a list and then handed it off to basis. This was all manual. Again, not an automated thing. And then, once everything went to prod, the statuses that were in the tracker, the SharePoint list, had to be updated to reflect that these had gone in. So once you kind of lift up the hood on this old process here, it got to look pretty ugly and pretty manual and very resource dependent. So we were certainly, this was certainly an opportunity for us to get much better with a product on the market. Okay, Dan.
Trying, since I used my little thing here, I think I'm messed up. Give me a moment.
Yeah.
To my normal non-drawing mode. There we go. Okay. Let me see.
All right.
Maybe right there.
Yes. So this graphic is just kind of demonstrating how Rev-Trac helped our particular situation. You know, instead of using that same request A with 3 transports in it as an example, with Rev-Trac, you would have one request entry within the Rev-Trac tool itself. The 3 transports would be attached to it, not as separate entries, though. They would be attached to the one request A, and then that request A moves through to QA and then on into prod ultimately as a unit, not as individual transport entries. So this was obviously the most logical way to do things when migrating changes, and we knew we needed to get there, and this definitely helped us expedite getting to that point. As you see there, yeah, when we go from dev to QA, and then the box next to that is for releases. For our normal changes for us, we'll go to production on weekly releases. And now what we do is these different requests go through dev and QA and then get queued up into a release. So the release in this case for November 1st. As you can see, there's request A has gone into there. It also already had request B and C in there. Now those requests will sit there until, and you can build it out a little bit more, Dan. Those requests will sit there until we go into the CAB review, and then everybody has their opportunity to review what's queued up for the week. And once we get through the CAB review and the QA team says, okay, these are good to go, they go automatically into production based on our schedule. And that can be Thursday at 4 p.m. It could be Saturday at noon, whenever you have set up your schedule. Once you said the release can go, it'll sit there until the proper and appropriate time, and then it'll automatically go into production. And provided there's no issues with any of the transports, it's done at that point. You know, with this new process, all of those, well, let's say almost all of those pain points that were highlighted in the previous slide have been either made much better or been eliminated entirely. All of those manual utility runs that we had for sequencing and dependency issues, those are all built right into the Rev-Trac tool and does that automatically. We don't have to rely on the developer or the BA to run those, or we don't have to rely on the QA team remembering to run those for the CAB review and going on into prod. So quite a bit of built-in efficiencies there for us. This whole process now for us becomes an exception-only management. So really, somebody really only needs to get majorly involved if there's a particular problem with one of the transports along the way. And that can happen, but you know, honestly, it doesn't happen a high percentage of the time. So a particular change or batch of changes, as I'm showing here, can go from dev and on into prod with very minimal involvement from either basis or the QA team, which is kind of the overseer and governance of the change process, and the developers or business analysts are really now self-service. They can move stuff from dev to QA and all the way up to the CAB review without anyone else needing to be involved with the process. And then once the CAB review is done and everything is approved there, it just goes. We approve it and it goes into production, whatever per our schedule, which is in this case, let's say 4 o'clock on Thursday. So yeah, just kind of summarizing. All right, so how all that new process helped us. So automation, we were definitely looking to build in automation wherever we could. And we were able to, as I just previously mentioned, we were able to get that in almost all of the process I went through. Automation of all transports through any number of SIDs. Yeah, we have implemented Rev-Trac in 12 different areas for us within SAP. So that was big. Transition to self-service. I mentioned that the developers and the BA and the project teams were all calling for more of this. We want to just be able to move stuff when it's ready to go. And that was very difficult and resource intensive previously. So we were able to make this happen, which is very nice. Transition to the migration of changes as a unit. Yeah, so the old method of migrating one transport at a time, we knew was not gonna make it for us. And migrating to changes as a unit or as a project or whatever makes sense, whatever logical grouping makes sense for you, is big. It just makes sense within the change process. Automated dependency and sequencing. Yeah, as I mentioned, this was all, we had it to some level, but it was all manual previously. Now this is all built into the Rev-Trac process. Time savings. Yeah, as you can imagine, without having multiple groups and multiple people involved in the change process all along the way, you can get things through quite a bit faster. So that was a nice time savings for us. Governance, ITQA, I mentioned, is kind of the oversight and governance for the change process. And governance in this case means, so for each of the various change types that you have, for us it was normal changes, which are stuff requested by the business or just an incident that was found, just normal changes that would get implemented on a weekly basis whenever they're done. So normal changes, project changes, emergency changes. I'm sure your organization has various flavors of these types of changes that go through. So for each of those, you build the workflow that makes sense for you for each particular type of change. And for us, it's a little bit different for each flavor. Different people are built into the process for approvals or for notifications or attachments, whatever it might be. You build the workflow that makes sense for your changes, and then Rev-Trac will apply that once they've selected a type of change. A particular workflow gets involved and applied, and then it works its way through each of those steps as you've defined it. Audit ready information. Like I mentioned, this started to become more and more important for us. Auditors were certainly looking for almost push of a button type reports where they could see the change process from start to finish. How was the change initiated? Who approved it along the way? who approved it to go into production, all of that in one place it became very important and difficult to do under the old process. We had to pull from a lot of different places to actually build that picture for an auditor. So being able to get it all in one place is valuable. Okay, Dan. Okay, why did we implement Rev-Trac? So we concluded that Rev-Trac had the best combination of end user friendliness and functionality and cost for us. We did consider other solutions. So certainly our evaluation led us to Active Control from Basis as well as Rev-Trac. And I'll mention that very early on in our SAP journey, we looked at Charm. So for those of you that either have also looked at Charm or have Charm, we did look at that very early on in the process, and it was deemed to be not right for our environment. So we did not reevaluate Charm when we went through the research for Rev-Trac and Active Control. How did you hear about Rev-Trac? Yeah, certainly any of the industry folks, when you ask them about this type of a system, Active Control and Rev-Trac typically bubble up to the top as candidates. So our research did the same, and so we looked at them from there. The implementation process for us. So this was done remotely, partially out of the pandemic need. I don't know if I would say we would have done that remotely if all things being normal again, but it worked for us. It worked for us. So we had a relatively small team, one basis person on the team, 2 IT QA people, and the Rev-Trac consultant essentially. And we were able to build all this out and make it happen with just that team remotely. So
yeah, it was as you said, Mark, the pandemic had impacted customers with remote projects. I think everybody on this call has participated in many remote projects over the pandemic, and it worked. Is it, some customer, I think, I know our consultants certainly prefer the on-site, but as we did with you and many other customers during the pandemic, the remote works as well. But to be honest, it tends to stretch it out a little bit longer sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just 2 or 3 hour meetings remotely, as opposed to a week or two spread out over maybe a month or something like that. So, but all in all, it gets done. It's just juggling all the other projects at the same time, right? And like I said, it was a small team, which in some ways limited the impact, which was good, right? So
yeah. So the pros and cons to the whole remote approach. I think one area where being in person would have probably helped, certainly with some of the training sessions, where you get the more of a classroom interaction, back and forth type question.
Agreed.
That becomes much easier to do when you're in person.
Yeah, and more effective.
Yeah, I think so. But like you say, you've got the recordings you can go back and see. But I think there's some efficiencies with the in-person training sessions, certainly, that would have been nice to have.
Sure, agreed. All right, I think this is the last one for you.
Yeah, and this really kind of just summarizes what's the value, how quickly did we receive it. So I'll mention this as all right, how quickly can you grab value from implementing this? And unfortunately, you have to say that depends.
Yes.
So for somebody in the change process that interacts with this process and this tool frequently, they will get value of it very quickly because they're in there. Their learning curve is still there, but it's much faster because they're in there very frequently.
Mhm.
If you have a person that only gets into this process once a month, and they've got to go in and, all right, figure out I did it this way last time, but then this one's a little bit different. How do I do that then? So it becomes a little, again, they get there and they know how to interact with it over time, but it just takes them a little bit longer. And I don't know how you avoid that for somebody that's an infrequent participant in the change process, if you know what I mean.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
But for those that interact with it regularly, it's a change, so there's new things to learn, but you can learn it very quickly. And once they do learn it, they love it. They love the self-service aspect of it, being able to get in and I can just move stuff from dev to queue when I want to move it. And I don't have to talk to you. I don't have to talk to
Yes.
you, and I don't have to get anybody else involved and wait and get an email back and all of that. So the automation was big, and self-service I mentioned. The automated dependency that just makes the process more efficient, and you don't have to
Yeah.
rely on somebody remembering to run it or reminding them to run it. So it's all of that. Yeah, so
Perfect.
that's kind of how it played out for us.
Yeah, no, wow, Mark, really appreciate that. Thank you very much. The detail of your before and after process was great with those slides, the kind words along the way. We really appreciate those as well. So thank you very much. And let me get through a couple slides and we'll probably come back for some Q&A here at the
Sure.
end. And yeah, so mentioned earlier, Swagelok is a relatively new customer. Started working with them a little over a year ago. And again, we're very happy that they were able to share their experiences with us here today. And we have around 200 customers around the globe. Here's just a sample of some of the other customers that we work with. We are adding a good amount these days each quarter here at Rev-Trac. I wanted to spend just a few minutes. Again, we're not doing demonstrations today, but I think this would be useful for existing customers as well as prospective customers that might have joined us today on what's unique to Rev-Trac. And much of this is reflected in what Mark was just presenting, right? But this change request approach to managing SAP changes, right? Don't manage transports, manage change. That was the foundation of Rev-Trac over 20 years ago. And Mark's slides I've been with Rev-Trac for about 8.5 or 9 years, and that was the best explanation I've seen of managing it from a transport perspective and some of the challenges you can experience with that versus moving to managing it as a change perspective. Because at the end of the day, you're implementing a change. Transports are just the vehicle to enact that business or technical change that you're trying to achieve with the transports. So that's a fundamental, and that is unique to Rev-Trac, right? We start with a Rev-Trac, not with a transport. So, and then the sequencing checks that Mark was talking about, we call that OOPS, Overtake and Overwrite Protection System. That's been with Rev-Trac for close to 20 years, and fundamental error checking and safety feature of Rev-Trac helps with that sequencing as Mark was talking about. We have recently, for existing customers, this might be interesting, in a release this year, just in 2022, we've made some changes, not huge changes, because this is the lifeblood of Rev-Trac is OOPS, but we've changed the timing of when the OOPS message pops up as you're doing your approval. So it actually happens a little bit earlier before you do your approval, which can make it a little bit more efficient. We've had some good feedback about that change. And one other change we've made is that customers can now, specifically for audit reasons, if a user skips an OOPS report, if you allow them to bypass the OOPS report, even after they were warned about potential sequencing issues, the customers now have the option of enforcing documentation of why they're doing that. So that was something we had. 2 changes we recently made to OOPS that might be interesting to some existing customers. That's available in our latest release. The dependency checks are newer, about 5 or 6 years old now. We call it pods, peripheral object dependency checks. And that's not looking for sequencing errors, but that's looking for the external dependencies. The example that we do when we do demonstrations, and you can see these in recorded versions as well, is we might have a Rev-Trac with a transport, let's say, for example, that has a report in it, and that report references a table. And then in a completely different Rev-Trac in a different transport is that table. So they're separate. Ideally, they might be under the same Rev-Trac, but in this global development environment that many customers work in, many times that can happen. So pods would let you know if that table that is the report is dependent on is in the target system before you ever move it. So it gives you a look before you leap type functionality, looking ahead at the target systems and let you know if you're missing anything. And a report in a table is the most basic example we can give, but it goes much deeper that with methods and classes and all these types of checks that are going on. So that's relatively new. The only caveat with that one is you have to be running the Rev-Trac web GUI to get the pods. So you have to take advantage of that, which doesn't cost the customer anything. It's included, but you have to set that up. And then another sort of safety check is our KISS check, CISS, Change Impact Scoring System, which is a basic scoring system that collects STO3 data on time or over time from the target systems and gives you a relative risk score. It doesn't let you drill down. It doesn't give you lots of detail, but it might alert you to, oh, these changes, the objects that you're changing or the changes that you're making are affecting objects that are highly used, and you might want to take a closer look at them from a testing perspective. So it's a basic impact analysis type solution, certainly not along the lines of some of the full-featured impact analysis solutions like Live Compare, but this works for some customers and is sufficient for them. So there's some of the unique error checking features to Rev-Trac. Cloning and auto retrofit is something for those customers running N+1, N+2 environments, maybe because you have big project rollouts going on or you're doing an S/4HANA transformation. Rev-Trac has supported that for many years, and all of the checking that we're just talking about works across these N+1 environments. Release management is something that Mark got into with some of his slides. That's about a 4 or 5 year old feature and getting a high level of adoption from our customers these days. And the main, some of the main benefits of release management is just bundling multiple Rev-Tracs into a release. As Mark was saying with Swagelok, they do a weekly release. So they had to have 52 releases a year, and they just pull them in for the normal changes, and you approve one release request instead of 5, 10, 20, or 30 or more individual Rev-Tracs. It's an efficiency type thing, and you can run all your sequencing and dependency checks at the release level during your CAB meeting if you have something similar. So release management can be a big boost in efficiency there. We've introduced a parallel development workbench in the last couple of releases, which basically lets users say, hey, who else is working on my objects? Gives you some really quick access to understand what's going on. Of course, OOPS will let you know when you try to move them, but you can also approach this from this workbench perspective with Parallel Development Workbench, which has been very helpful to many of our customers. The integrations that Mark was talking about are based now on REST APIs, right? We moved away from the web services integration from years ago, and we invested a lot into our REST API architecture, which makes it very flexible and secure for customers that are integrating with third-party applications such as ServiceNow and Jira and Tricentis and Micro Focus and so on and so forth, all the different ones that they might have in their environment. And lastly, other parts. Part of Rev-Trac is Rev-Trac Insights, which is an application that's included for those that have been with Rev-Trac for a while. We used to call it SALT, but it was renamed Insights a few years ago, and that gives you about 9 apps to look into, mainly development type activities. But it's included, and Pods is dependent on that. That's how Pods comes about, the dependency checks based on this Insights information. We get a lot of good feedback on our modern HTML5 GUI, very intuitive, makes the training and onboarding Very simple. Normally, training sessions for Rev-Trac are less than 90 minutes for developers, analysts, configuration type people. And then, of course, we certainly feel that our team that has a lot of experience and our focus solely as a company on SAP change management is unique to us as well. So they're just some of the key things that we feel make us unique in the marketplace. And then here's a picture. Mark gave you a good picture of what their process looks like. We use this a DevOps toolchain or CI/CD process diagram to explain how Rev-Trac would be working sort of in the center here with some type of approval steps. These are just examples because Rev-Trac doesn't dictate to you how you need to move your changes. It's completely configurable. And then you might be integrating with some of these other solutions we were just mentioning, right? The Jira and ServiceNows and code review steps like ABAP Test Cockpit or Virtual Forge, well, now called Onapsis, sorry, I have to update that logo, or impact analysis like Live Compare and testing tools. So we can highly automate many aspects of this tool chain to automate things that people are doing manually today and pull in other tools. And this is achieved through our REST API integrations with Rev-Trac. So that, and then lastly, before we get to the Q&A, right, being that Rev-Trac focuses solely on the SAP change management aspect, and we don't get into other areas like testing or whatever, we integrate with testing tools, but we don't have our own testing. We're always keeping an eye on what's going on in the SAP world, right? And I think many people know that SAP is always introducing new technologies. Some of them catch on, some of them don't catch on, right? And we're always cautious a little bit before we dive right in. We'll normally dip our toe in, because if you think back to some of the recent SAP technologies I can think of that sort of got a splash from a marketing standpoint but never caught on would be things like Leonardo or C4HANA and things like that. So we take a little bit of a wait and see approach. But one area that we've seen come up over the last 18 months and seems to have a lot of momentum and critical mass is BTP, the business technology platform from SAP. We're seeing lots of customers already adopt it or making plans to adopt it. So we are investing our R&D efforts in that area. And this is just sort of a quick slide to update existing customers as well as prospective customers, sort of what we're doing, right? So if we're specifically talking about these new technologies being the BTP from SAP, where are we, right? Well, we're already there in some aspects because CTS Plus is not a new technology, but we've been supporting that for 12 years now, and that supports many applications within BTP. So if bottom line is if you're looking at BTP and you want Rev-Trac to manage it, so long as it's on SAP supported list for CTS Plus and BTP, it's there, it's working today. You know, we've had it working for customers for a while now. So we have you covered there. And that's really moving around technically the MTAR files, the MTAR files that are being moved in the different BTP, Neo, and Cloud Foundry environments. Another newer technology that SAP is introducing to support the BTP is Cloud TMS, so cloud-based transport management system, right? It's configured in the cloud. One caveat from SAP, not from Rev-Trac, is that there is no support for on-premise, right? So you wouldn't be using it in an environment such as Swagelok, let's say, where it's, you know, the traditional SAP applications, or even an S4HANA on-premise, as SAP calls them, environments. It's not meant for that. It's meant more for the pure BTP applications. But anyway, it's something that SAP has introduced a few years ago. It's coming along, and we are seeing some interest from customers. Not a whole lot of productive use, but we are seeing some interest, and we do have an existing customer in Europe that we're starting to work with, where we're beginning to prototype that in our lab, and we expect to have Rev-Trac integrated and used for controlling cloud TMS changes later on this year. So that's our roadmap type expectations there. And then the other area that we get a lot of inquiries from customers on and prospects on is, what about the whole GitHub and Bitbucket and that type of area, right? Sort of the non-SAP application development methodologies that have been in there. And again, we took a wait and see approach on that, and we're starting to have some customers ask how Rev-Trac can help them manage those branches and development branches and automatically create these branches and things like that. And we're working with a few beta customers on that currently to support their processes so that they can get the governance and control that they need out of Rev-Trac for those newer deployment methodologies that are associated with Git and Bitbucket and those types of things. And GCTS fits into this category as well. It's not listed on the slide. We're actually working next month. We'll be presenting with a customer on their use of GCTS, which is Git enabled CTS, at the DSAG event, the German SAP users group. So we are making progress in that area. So just wanted to update people on what we're doing in these areas. And with that, I think we're going to move to the Q&A section. So you get to see Mark and I, not on video, but our best shots we could come up with on the picture side. So if anybody has questions, I'm starting to look through the attendee list for raised hands or questions that were submitted. Please enter them. And sometimes this takes me a moment or two to find them out. As I'm looking here, Mark, I had one for you. Is just, I think you said 12 SAP landscapes or environments there.
Correct.
When you talk about SAP systems, what's that somewhere? So if I recall, somewhere between 40 and 50 SAP systems?
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Right, and that was a mix of the traditional ABAP changes and the non-ABAP type, right? Like perhaps portal. Yes. I think business objects or data services was in use over there, those types of applications, right?
Both, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so that was one I had. I'm looking up and down the questions. I think we've answered a lot already because I'm not seeing any here. Let me see if there's anything in the chat. Sometimes people will submit there. So nothing there. I'll just let it go for a moment or two. Or if you wanted to ask a verbal question, raise your hand and I could unmute you. I'll just keep an eye out here for the next 30 seconds or so. See if we get any in. Oh, here we go. Satya. Okay. Here's one for us, and we'll just see who's better at giving the answer here. How the non-transport changes like manual config, web services, batch jobs are being handled is the question. So, Mark, you talked about manual steps in between transports, but I think this is a little bit different, right? Because you can control non-transportable changes with Rev-Trac to some extent, meaning that you can put an approval process around them. Okay, so if you have manual config, if you have to open up a system, open up a prod system, not the thing people like to talk about a whole lot, but it needs to happen sometimes, and you want to put a process around that, we've had customers configure Rev-Trac to support that so that you have an audit trail. Now, of course, once you open the system and do your thing, Rev-Trac not in control of that anymore, but it's controlling whether or not you were tracking whether those things were handling. As far as batch jobs and web services, I'm not quite sure. Again, you can use Rev-Trac as just sort of that workflow approval process, and if you need to have some steps defined around that and enforced around that, you could use Rev-Trac for those non-transportable type changes. So hopefully I answered that one all right. Another one came in as I was answering. This is more for Mark, maybe. You mentioned that Charm does not fit your requirements. What was the main showstopper for Charm? I know it was a while ago you analyzed it, Mark, but I don't know if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, well, so we looked at Charm very, very early on in our SAP process, and it was, I think at the time we looked at it, so this evaluation went on right when we were implementing the whole system.
Okay, so almost 10 years ago.
Yeah, 10, 12 years ago easily, and I think a lot of it was just overwhelming at the time. Being brand new to SAP and that whole environment, I think it wanted to grab and take hold of everything, and I think the team that evaluated it was really not ready for that at that point in time. I think, and over the last 12 years, we've really gotten away from solution manager almost entirely. But so I think clearly it wouldn't be probably a good fit for us, even if we had evaluated it at this point. But I think at the time we looked at it, it was just too much, too soon, and too all-encompassing for us right at that point in time.
Okay, no, appreciate that. I'll add a little bit of additional information there. We certainly can, you can come back to us and we have some comparison documents that we would be happy to share with you individually. But one thing that has sort of made the news, let's say, is with SAP Rise, which is another new offering from SAP. It is Solution Manager and therefore Charm. It's our understanding for reading the SAP documentation that you're not getting Solution Manager if you sign up for their Rise offering. So you would have to pay for it extra. So there would be all of a sudden a charge for it, is our understanding. So that might impact some customers that might be going on that S4HANA journey and looking at Rise. So, okay, and then here's another one. That is how is the downtime requirement be dealt with during a big release which has more than 1,000 transports? Mark, when you were going over some things, you mentioned a couple big releases with a couple hundred transports, I believe.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any insight in that. I have some answers to that, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to answer first.
Yeah, I will. I will say, fortunately for us, we don't have anything that grabs a hold of thousands of transports at a time.
Okay.
Now I can tell you for 100 or a couple hundred transports, the time it takes to move those in, I would say it's not. I mean, there's some time involved, no doubt, but I would not say it's significant. I wouldn't say it's probably even an hour that we've experienced anyways. So
okay, and there are
there's some there, but it's not significant. I'll put it that way, at least for us.
Okay, that's fine. And we certainly have had similar type questions from customers that have these 1,000 or multi-thousand type of big go lives normally they're associated with. And there are ways in Rev-Trac to speed that up. Ways in Rev-Trac using native SAP, right? So you can set Rev-Trac to do what's called import single, where it's one transport at a time, okay? And that's the way many customers approach it. But there's also a very simple setting where we take advantage of SAP's import subset, which is similar to an import all, where it bunches hundreds or thousands of transports together in a big list and pushes them all in. And customers can experience, especially when you have these large lists, 1,000 transports, you might do a test run and it might take you 5 hours in import single mode. And then if you switch over to the import subset mode, it might take an hour or something like that. I can't give you specific statistics, but it is that much of a reduction. So that's built into Rev-Trac, and customers can take advantage of that. So that would be one way to address large amounts of transports and trying to reduce the import time. And it's just using native SAP at the TP level to enable that. And last one I see here on our list is sort of an open-ended one. What is the role of an SAP release manager? And I'll give you my quick perspective, and that's sort of defined by the customer, right? So an SAP release manager, in my experience, has to herd the cats, right? Unfortunately, right? They have to get all the developers and configurers and people that are making and approving transports to make sure they're doing what they need to do in terms of documentation and testing and making sure that no transports are left behind, all those types of things. So they have a very difficult job, especially in larger SAP environments, and that's why automation tools, I think, such as Rev-Trac can certainly help, because it's helping you do a lot of that. You'll still have to chase some people down to make sure they hit the deadlines and the timings and the requirements that you have for documentation and testing, but a tool like Rev-Trac can really play the partial role of an automated SAP release manager, but most sizable customers I see still need to have some person in that capacity to make sure that all the people are doing what they're supposed to be doing and things go as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, Dan, I'll add that we don't have what we would truly define as a release manager in our environment. We've got, we're using the release management aspects of Rev-Trac.
Yeah.
But I would say, release can get to be a tricky term. Like if we were developing software, a release might mean, again, thousands of transports for somebody.
And it has a completely different definition if you're developing software. Yeah.
Yeah, for us, it's a grouping of, a handful of changes, not thousands upon thousands of things. So release for us just really means, a grouping of some changes, and it's not, and we don't even, like I said, have a truly defined SAP release manager per se.
Right. I would say a grouping and a timing, right? You group them and then they move together at the prescribed time. Yeah.
That's how we're using it. Yes.
Yeah. And again, one line I've used many times in my SAP career is the day that I see two SAP customers manage their changes the same way, I know it's time for me to move to something else, because then I've seen everything, right? Everyone does it slightly different because they have different requirements and different needs, different business needs, different audit requirements, different documentation and QA process requirements. So
yeah, and then so that's where really, Dan, where the configurability of Rev-Trac really helps, is because you can define all those various ways and make it work for you.
Yes, very configurable and flexible, two words we use a lot. So well, thank you. Oh, I thought we were done, but let me one more. Can this be integrated to ADO, Azure DevOps, which is associated with user stories? Yes, I mentioned Jira, I mentioned ServiceNow. I did not have ADO on there, but same concept. You would have a ADO user story associated with a Rev-Trac, individual Rev-Trac, and then you could even have the higher level of an ADO Epic or whatever it might be called in the Azure DevOps world associated with a Rev-Trac release. And that can all be managed and bi-directionally synced together. So absolutely works with Azure DevOps. So, okay. So we did get some questions there at the end. We're approaching an hour, which is great. I don't want to take any more time really, because I know everyone has busy schedules. And Mark, thank you very, very much, and Swagelok for their time today and for sharing that information, and for everyone that we had join today. We look forward to hearing from anyone who would like more information on Rev-Trac. We'll be at ASUGS.
The email, so the email's there. So if anybody thinks of something after the fact, feel free
Appreciate that offer.
Email us.
So look for us at ASUG events, both in the US. We'll be at the SOG event in Australia, where we're headquartered next week. And then next month, we'll be at the DSAG event in Leipzig, Germany, I think. So I know we have some international folks registered for today's call. So if you're attending those events, please seek out Rev-Trac. And we hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.